First of all, the Bengals almost officially on the clock now, although, of course, they've been working on the clock since December when they clinched the #1 overall pick. It was a miserable 2019 season, the first for Zack Taylor as the head coach in Cincy. They lost their first 11 games. They finished 2-14. Of course, the Bengals' needs are plentiful. 30th in points scored, 17 a game. Worst rushing defense in the NFL. 149 yards per game. Now, Jarrett, your thoughts on where Cincinnati stands as they go into tonight? They did franchise tag A.J. Green. He's going to be a part of this team next year. Did that move make sense to you?
Yeah, Jay, it did make sense to me because when you have a guy with that type of talent, we know that injuries have kind of been the main concern, but it seems like everything on that ankle is healed up for A.J. Green. And when you have him, he's a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver. So if you're going to go get a guy like Joe Burrow, then you have to be able to have someone that can go up and get the football for him and a guy that has experience. And I think keeping A.J. Green around is a good thing, especially inside of that locker room. He's one of those guys that are veteran, and you can't have too many veterans, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Certainly can't, and especially when you're coming from 2-14. It never hurts to have some reliable guys with the football. All right, let's talk about the man who you just mentioned a moment ago, likely to be the first pick here in just a matter of minutes from now. You know, from Athens, Ohio to Cincinnati, you just get on Route 32, you go across southern Ohio, takes roughly 2.5 hours. It's an easy trip in the car. That's the drive the Burrow family will be happy to make for years to come, to watch Joe Burrow play NFL football. He was actually born in Iowa, spent his younger years in Nebraska, his dad coaching there, brothers playing there, considers Athens, though, his hometown. That's where the family is gathered tonight watching the draft. His dad, Jimmy, a longtime college coach. He was defensive coordinator at Ohio University when Joe was coming up through school. Jimmy retired last year so he could watch Joe's final college season, and what a wildly entertaining season that was. To get some more insight on the likely marriage between Burrow and the Bengals, we welcome in Whitney Harding, sports anchor at WCMH in Columbus, not far from Athens, of course, to talk about both sides of this partnership. Bengals, Burrow. Let's start with Burrow's path. There was some actual concern from some analysts that he's a little bit of a one-year wonder because he was so sensational last year. Whitney, is any of that fair?
I don't know if it's fair, Jared, because don't you want to improve by leaps and bounds from your first year to your second year? Isn't that what people usually want to see happen? This is a guy who, it's not like he doesn't have the talent. We know this kid can make the throws. I mean, you don't go to Ohio State and you're not able to play. He just got behind two really good quarterbacks there, went to LSU. The big thing for his final year, they really built the offense. They spread it out a lot more. So he had a lot more chances to really get the football out quickly, do some things. I mean, I think he showed with his numbers, definitely capable. So I don't know if that is really a fair assessment. He had a lot of talent on that team to throw to. That's going to be kind of the question with Cincinnati. They do have some great receivers. You guys talked about it with A.J. Green. You can't forget Auden Tate. And, of course, Tyler Boyd, phenomenal year stepping into A.J. Green's shoes while he was hurt this last year. But, I mean, as far as Joe Burrow goes, you know he can make the throws. You know he has the IQ. It's just, can you get him in that right system? And with the way Zack Taylor's kind of doing things in Cincinnati now, kind of a hybrid of some spread West Coast offense, they're going to throw the football. That could be a really, really good position for Joe. And let's talk about those throwing statistics from just last season, Whitney, because it's truly incredible stuff to think about. There were 65 total touchdowns, 60 of them passing. You know how many picks he threw? That many. Not many.
Six picks, 60 touchdowns.
Yes.
It's remarkable what he did. Now, as you mentioned a moment ago, what the Bengals have to do with this, Andy Dalton's still on the roster at the moment. So how does that complicate things here down the line? Obviously, it looks like the Bengals, this is a done deal for Burrow.
Right.
So what do you think falls in line here for Andy Dalton?
Maybe you have a great backup quarterback in Andy Dalton, but at the same time, you probably want to get rid of that contract money that he has. It'd be nice to kind of spread around that, maybe $17 million, maybe get some other guys in there. So I think we could see some trades down the line. I mean, it could happen tonight. Who knows? Andy Dalton definitely is still a guy who can play some football. Just maybe the Bengals are now feeling, okay, we have a chance to bring in an Ohio kid. Let's go that direction. So I think a trade could definitely benefit the Bengals, but it also could benefit Joe Burrow to come into a place where you have a guy like Andy Dalton to kind of help show him the ropes, going to come into that kind of a system where you've got that veteran presence. So a trade could definitely benefit Cincinnati, but if you're not going to get the guys or the amount of guys you need for that, what's wrong with having a veteran quarterback?
Nothing wrong with that, especially when QB1 goes down potentially in the NFL. Happens all the time. Let's talk a little bit more about Burrow's history. Burrow was one of the unique players, I think, in this situation in a draft, to be this highly coveted at the top of the draft and yet have been a transfer. And Joe has two distinct, enormous fan bases, really three if you go back to his high school side in the Athens, Ohio area. But at Ohio State, people loved him. He led his team to the state championship game in Ohio, then transfers because of backup, basically, in terms of the number of guys in the quarterback room, goes to LSU and is an absolute legend now in Baton Rouge. I can't imagine there's a guy with a bigger following than what Joe Burrow has.
I mean, it's kind of a great combination, right? It's an Ohio kid who's played for the Bayou Bengals, now going to go to the Bengals. I mean, it's kind of this special moment. We've seen it here in Ohio before, a different level perhaps when LeBron James went to the Cleveland Cavaliers, but it's that kind of energy, and that is what the Bengals would get. They won't just get the yards, touchdowns, the young arm. They will get the ability to sell this guy as this is an Ohio kid coming to take over this franchise, take over this team. That is a really great benefit that you can have in this situation. So definitely a great story, and it's going to be good for the Bengals to get that energy there. I mean, it's kind of with that franchise and with the fan base, there's always a little bit of that excitement, but by the end of the season, you kind of feel like, well, okay, this is kind of how it's been the last few years. This might be the refresh they need, and what better way than with a home state kid.
Now, Whitney, let's talk a little bit about the Bengals overall. Their defense is obviously not a great situation a year ago, but they did make some acquisitions this offseason, especially up front, to try to boost that lineup. So, yeah, they were 2-14, but they seem to have the confidence of a team that might be much better.
Absolutely. I mean, getting DJ Reader from the Houston Texans, huge move. They made some big moves defensively in this offseason. That brings the pressure up front. Maybe they're looking later in the draft, second or third round, get a linebacker, maybe another edge rusher, somebody like that, because they also brought in some secondary help as well. So they got two cornerbacks now from the Vikings coming in. They also brought in some more help back there. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do in later rounds, but they also need some help on the offensive side up front as well. I know you and I have talked about that.
Certainly have. I wanted to point your attention to something here. I want to talk about the schools. This year, we always talk about, like, it's just like these are football factories right across the country and how many players are coming out of these schools. I want to point your attention to this. If you follow the draft year in, year out, and you wonder if all the players really do come from the same places, here's an example of that. The players, from the first round I'm talking about, from the year 2000, so the past 20 years, take a look at this. Ohio State and Alabama are tied for having the most first-round picks over the past 2 decades, both sending 31 players off to the NFL. Miami, Florida State, USC, also football factories over the past couple decades, and that makes perfect sense. Now, Whitney, Ohio State can't count Joe Burrow, but you're in Columbus, and obviously Ohio State's going to be very active here in this first round. We certainly know that with what could be coming up here with Chase Young and Jeffrey Okudah very soon.
Right. I mean, and we've seen it the past few years, the Bosa's coming out, all of those cornerbacks, secondary players for Ohio State. I mean, if you look at the New Orleans Saints roster, it seems like every time you see a name come up, you're like, oh, that's a Buckeye. And Alabama's the same way with different teams. It's amazing. What gets me tonight is not just Joe Burrow. How many LSU Tigers could go, not just in the first round, in this draft in general? They were just, you see why they won the national championship this year. It's just completely stacked. But yeah, I mean, you see why kids go to certain schools, and tonight is a big reason why, you know, coaches can kind of be showing that off a little bit and saying, oh, look, we have more and more coming. And you see why, you know, the secondary players keep coming to places like Ohio State. You see why the running backs go to Alabama, things like that. And it makes a lot of sense when you watch the patterns tonight. Like I said, LSU could have a really big night and weekend.
It certainly could be a very Tiger-heavy weekend here, considering the number. They had 16 guys go to the Combine, LSU did. It was remarkable. They were all over the place, and that's why they won the national championship. It was not just Joe Burrow, by the way. Whitney, one more for you. I want to talk about the Bengals in terms of their long-term view. The second round is just as important to them because of all the holes they have to fill in this team.
Lineman, maybe a guy on the inside, a guard, who can really help with that run game. You look at their numbers last year, and, of course, Joe Mixon rushed for over 1,000 yards, but besides him, there were only 400 or so rushing yards that weren't done by him. So you've really got to get them some help up front, and also if you can get the run game, help with the run game on the line, that helps with pass protection as well.
Certainly can there. By the way, just for clarification, the Bengals are officially on the clock. I can't imagine this is going to be a long time for them to make this pick. I want to go back to JARRETT PAYTON. And JARRETT, I've got a topic of conversation I think is going to be close and dear to your heart. It's about the running backs available tonight. There has only been maybe 1 or 2 running backs that people have really thought, even though it's a glamour position in college football, might be first-round picks tonight. I'm going to go through a few of the best running backs tonight and let people see who maybe they could be keeping an eye on later on tonight in terms of running back availability. We start with Ohio State and J.K. Dobbins. What he did this past year was absolutely phenomenal for his career, 3-year career. Hard to do better than what he did, and that's a high standard at Ohio State. He went head-to-head twice this year with a really talented Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin. For his career, he merely ran for 6,000 yards. That was in 3 years. Don't have to be great at math to figure out how good that is. DeAndre Swift from Georgia, a lot of people like his versatility. Clyde Edwards-Helaire from LSU, you saw him in the national championship run, just an absolute stud. Zack Moss from Utah, a lot of people haven't seen his best work. He has just been phenomenal. Jarrett, I want to get your opinion on, if you're a team and you need a running back, do you value any of those guys enough to consider a first-round pick?
Oh, definitely, Jay. I mean, you start to look at how, first and foremost, how the running back position has been disvalued over the years. And I think it's really hard because a lot of these guys, when you look at a guy like Jonathan Taylor, man, this dude was so close to almost getting to that. If he had like 23 more yards, I think his freshman year, we're talking about back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons. To me, that is unheard of, especially with guys like Ron Dane, and being in that company is huge. But yeah, Swift as well. All these guys, I think there's maybe 3 guys, and all 3 guys that you named, I think have an opportunity to go in the first round. But still, a lot of teams and a lot of organizations are looking at getting these running backs later in the draft because they know they can get value there, and they know the shelf life of a running back is 2 to 3 years. That's what's so hard about going in the first round for that position. But still, you have guys like Ezekiel Elliott that you see, another guy from Ohio State. When those guys come around, you have to be able to snag them. I don't know if they have one of those type of guys in this draft this year.
Yeah, it's awfully difficult to project that, but those are from their college careers and their tape from college. It's extraordinary how talented those guys are, especially at the top. Jerry, I want to talk to you about your experience in the draft. You come from a legendary football family. Your dad, Walter, one of the greatest players in NFL history, undoubtedly so. You had your career that included your opportunity to be a part of the NFL draft. And the big deal that night is this, the phone. You can't wait to hear that thing ring and hear that call. Take me through what your draft night was like and some of the unique experiences you remember from that.
Well, Jay, I was a second-day guy, and, being at Miami, I was behind Clinton Portis. We both came in together, Willis McGahee the next year, and then Frank Gore the year after that. So when Frank got his knee injury, I got a chance to be able to play, and then for me, it was my big game in the Orange Bowl, being the MVP. And so I got a chance to kind of have a little bit going to East-West Shrine game, get a little bit of feel of how that feels to play against some of the best players in the country. And then on that second day, I was waiting with my phone, and I got a call from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they told me that they're going to get me in the 5th round, and I was super, super excited. My phone rang. It rang, and it was somebody else. It was not the Pittsburgh Steelers, so I had to wait and then become a free agent and had a bunch of phone calls. Jeff Fisher called me, and the relationship with Jeff Fisher and my father, being Chicago Bears, I just felt comfortable to going to Tennessee and getting a chance to be by a guy and behind a guy named Chris Brown, and then Travis Henry came in, so I got a chance to be around a lot of those guys. But it was a tough day sitting around with a room full of 200 people waiting for that phone to ring and making sure that my phone was charged.
That's the part about this that would drive me crazy. If you're an anxious person at all, I can't imagine what this is. Big, tough football players, they're not supposed to worry about these things. I can't imagine that kind of concern. When you finally do find your destination, though, Can you take us through what it's like not only for the player but for the family and the coaches and everybody who had a hand in the development of a player to get to the next level?
And I think that's what makes tonight so special. And I think virtually, this draft is a little bit different because a lot of these guys, they grew up wanting to play in the NFL, and they won't get a chance tonight to be able to walk across that stage and be, next to the commissioner and wear the hat and have the jersey. So it's going to be a little bit different for a lot of these guys tonight. But every single person that you look back into, not just coaches, but your parents, your friends, your family, and also teachers from school that pushed you to get to that point, it all comes full circle once you get a chance to go wherever you're going. And then once you get there, it's just not about being there. It's about taking it to the next level. And I think that's the cool thing of watching some of these guys, how they develop. They might not be first round guys, but they get into a system that fits them. And once they do, we start to see them really flourish and take their game up another notch.
All right, just to update you on the Bengals selection, time is running out a little bit on their clock. They're down under 4 minutes now on their selection. I can't believe they're actually waiting this long to make the pick. I've been running well, I guess running to the computer now, not running up to the podium anymore. Those days are old. Jarrett, one quick thing I wanted to ask you about from the overall view of this year's draft. Is there one particular team who you view as maybe the most interesting going into tonight? Maybe a team that can make an enormous step if they maybe play their cards right tonight?
I'm going to have to go with the Miami Dolphins. 14 picks in this draft, and then also, 3 tonight. And I think for them, this is going to be crucial, Jay, for them to figure out which way they want to take this organization. And I think really quick, they have to get a quarterback because that is what runs these NFL teams. You have to have a signal caller that can do pretty much everything, be that coach on the field. So watching what Miami does tonight, especially early on, do they move up? Do they get Tua? Do they get Justin Herbert? If they can do that and figure out that way, and then also some offensive line help, I think they're the most interesting team in this draft this year.
Well, we have just learned the Bengals pick is in, so momentarily we'll know for sure about the new first-round pick for the Cincinnati Bengals and the #1 overall pick in this 2020 NFL Draft. If it's not Joe Burrow, we might just have to walk out of here because things will be weird at that point. But one quick thought, following up on that, Jarrett, about the overall view of this Bengals franchise. A quarterback's great, and there's so much investment in a quarterback because of how valuable that position is in the NFL level. But what else do you think they need to try to get this thing turned around from 2-14?
Well, I definitely think you got to figure out offensively on that offensive line and making sure that whoever you're going to select, and if it's going to be a quarterback, that you have that help there. I think also as well, you got to look around on the defensive side of the ball as well. Can you plug and play some of these other guys and put in position, maybe at the cornerback position and also back? And you got to start to look at how the team as a whole. But Jay, it all really starts though with your quarterback. You have to be able to build from there. And if you can't build from there, you don't have that guy, especially a guy that is a little bit different and one of those next level guys that has the potential, then you're pretty much in a hole because we know that this is a quarterback driven league. And to me, that's where it all starts.
Certainly does. And in the case of Joe Burrow, if the Bengals do in fact start there, that's a pretty good place to start. He's had a remarkable career, certainly a remarkable finish to career. I want to make a couple quick points about Joe Burrow. He's at home tonight with his family in Athens, Ohio. And an important story about Joe Burrow that came out during the Heisman Trophy ceremony. You'll recall the incredible speech he gave on stage in New York, where he talked about the difficult situation for many people back home in Athens. It is an impoverished area of the state of Ohio, and $500,000 came into the Athens area food bank to support folks because of what Joe Burrow had said. The pick is in from the Cincinnati Bengals, and we can tell you officially now, once and for all, Joe Burrow is in fact a Cincinnati Bengal, and it is truly the capper of a remarkable journey for Joe. An incredible high school career at Athens High School, leading them to the state championship game in one of the great championship games in Ohio high school history. His team actually lost that day to Toledo Central Catholic, and then he went on obviously to Ohio State, and then after a difficult situation there, tied up in a depth chart issue with Dwayne Haskins, he transfers to LSU. And look at what he did. Heisman Trophy, national champion, 60 total touchdowns, and now the #1 pick in the NFL draft. So let's go around the horn and get the thoughts of our panel here as we talk about what this pick means to the Cincinnati Bengals. Jarrett, let's go back to you. Just basically what this confirms for the Bengals and their plans as they move forward here.
They're getting a special talent, Jay. I mean, you really look at this young man, and let's also talk about an undefeated season as well. And it's really hard when you win a national championship or you win a Heisman to be able to live up to all the hype. I think he's more than a football player, man. He's exactly what you want inside of your locker room, inside your organization. He is one of those guys that I believe can really change the face of your organization as well and set the tone. And so Cincinnati is getting not just a quarterback, I think they're getting the face of a franchise. And to me, that's what, the Bengals need. They need to be able to have that and then from there, build from there. But the kid's special. He can make every single throw that you want, plus his mental capacity to be able to break down defenses, to me, is what makes him different. Also being able to move and throw outside the pocket. This young man is special, and I think we're going to see big things from Joe Burrow in Cincinnati.
Undeniably special. That's true. Let's go to Whitney Harding back in Columbus now to get your perspective on Joe. And I don't know if you can hear it in your ear from the folks in Athens, Ohio, but I'm sure they're a little excited.
Even people in the newsroom were saying, oh, right, that's great. He already has a hat in his hands. So, no, it definitely is exciting. And, Jarrett, I completely agreed with what he said. It is the intangibles that Joe Burrow has. I mean, you remember the Clemson game when that defense came out. He looked a little rattled from the beginning, but as the game went on, he was able to adjust and get used to things. That's something that you can't really teach. And those are the kind of smarts and the leadership that he's going to bring to this team. And it's a team that you look at pieces, there are things there. So he's not stepping into an empty cupboard, if you will. There are some pieces there. I definitely think it's going to be a good fit. And like I said before, Bengals fans can get excited about this. It is a home state kid staying or coming back home, however you want to put it.
Now, Whitney, well said. Whitney Harding there in Columbus tonight. Thank you, Whitney, for joining us. And now